Asher's Bakery in Northern Ireland was penalised for refusing to bake a cake for a customer who asked for one with a political slogan on in support of gay marriage in Northern Ireland, which is yet to be legalised there. Their case went to through the Equalities Commission, and so on. Went through the courts, and they were fined for doing that. They said no. As Christians, we should be able to refuse certain types of messages on our cakes. They weren't. They said that it wasn't because the person in question was gay. It was happy to serve gay customers. It was the specific message they felt they couldn't, in good conscience, bake this.
Well,
particular
can
cake.
I intervene here? Because this is very important.
I just want to say this is where there's been a key touch point of: does secularism favour a certain ideology, or does it protect the freedoms of the Christians?
Before Andrew answers the question, let's get away from the cake.
All right.
It was a cake, but the crucial thing you have to understand in this matter is that the cake was a publication.
Okay.
It was what was written on the cake. It wasn't. It wasn't just the colour of the decoration.
And
it was what it said. The cake was a publication. If this had been a book, a pamphlet, or a newspaper, and they had been told you will be punished for not publishing something with which you disagree, then the issue would be absolutely blazingly clear. Because it's a cake, people don't notice the outrageously totalitarian nature of it. You must publish this, whether you like it or not.
Do you
it's
think
not a
secularism
in a free society?
Printing firm than a publishing firm, I think.
Well,
but
do you think secularism came to the rescue here because it supported the rights of the person who wanted to have that message baked on that cake?
Secularism didn't do anything in this. I repeat again, the UK is not a secular state, so one can hardly use its judgments as exemplars of secularism.
The judges have said frequently in cases of this matter that it's not that they're not guided by Christian principle anymore. It's a secular state de facto,
so the law
not
has
yet de jure, but that will come.
What a secularist will want to do will be, as I said, to try and maximise everyone's freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of belief to the extent that it is compatible with the rights and freedoms of others. I think in that case that principle was arguable.
But where people can be forced to publish things with which they disagree, there is no freedom.
Well, printing firms do that as
well. They may do it, but they can't be forced to do it.
Freedom.
I don't think any court would ever accept it. It was
I think we all agree with regulating markets.
Of this case that it was, and the other thing is,
if you bring a service to the market,
the character of the complainant is one thing. The character of the bakers, who were the targets of the complaint, it seems to me to be an important thing. They were an overtly Christian company.
And Peter, do you? I mean, why then? Do you think the judge came down in favour of the person who wanted the cake to be baked and against the?
Personally, I think the judge made a mistake in law, and I personally think the case must have been inadequately argued by those who made the case. I can't understand how any judge in this jurisdiction could say that it was right for somebody to be forced to publish an opinion with which they disagreed. But I think the cake issue has always mixed it up.
This cake baking thing is, I just go back and forth. It's like, yes, he should be able to bake any cake he wants or not. But then, in the battle days when people justified racism and lunch counters and buses segregated, and at some point it took the federal government saying, we're sending the troops in to integrate your schools, even though they're down there in Alabama saying segregation forever. At some point, sometimes you have to use force to get people, at least to start, to bring them around.
Right.
We didn't end slavery by market forces. It took a war.
Civil Rights Act of 1964, I don't want to relitigate it. You have to offer products to every person, regardless of race, color, creed, and all of that stuff. But that if there is a specific artistic quality to it or a customization to it that happens to go against your beliefs, that you just don't have to do it, whether I think that's abhorrent or not. You just don't. We wouldn't ask a Satanist wouldn't be allowed to walk into a Muslim baker and say, put Muhammad on the cake. No one in their right mind, I think, would think that that's the government's job to force the baker to do that. A mundane task. We all go to the grocery to buy the products that are there, and all they have to do is put it in the bag and walk out. If a grocer was saying we're not going to bag groceries for black people, that is actually in violation of the 1964 Civil Liberties Act. But the idea that we would force a specific product. You wouldn't want a Jewish painter who shouldn't have to be forced to take commissions from a neo-Nazi. Or
in 2018, it's not 1964, so maybe we don't need such draconian laws. Historically, when you...
But also we needed those laws to reverse Jim Crow laws. I mean,
that's right.
the thing.
Yeah. So,
which don't exist anymore.
In the battle days, you needed to send the federal troops in to integrate the schools. Maybe we don't need to do that now. Maybe, this one baker out of 100 will refuse to bake a cake. But as the justices pointed out, okay, we're going to protect this guy's religious expressions, but if it turns out that every other baker refuses to bake cakes for blacks and gays and so on, then we can't let that happen. That may never happen.
Yeah.
And it could be we don't need the laws now because we have social media. People could just shun that baker on social media and not go to that store. Or if that's what you want, you do give them your business. And so the market sort of sorts it out.
So the Supreme Court avoided the big issue. So the headline that you're hearing today from the left is, oh my God, the Supreme Court has stood with religious people against gay people. That's what the Supreme Court just did. Okay, first of all, here's my view of this case and every other case like it. I do not believe that it is the government's job to tell you who you can and cannot do business with. And that includes discrimination. Okay, I'm open about this. I think that if you want to discriminate against a Jew, that is your problem. And you know what I will do? I will go start an alternative business and I will run you out of business. I will go to the business across the street and they will get my patronage and they will run you out of business. I think this is true across the board. I don't see why this is a freedom of religion issue per se, because it seems like a freedom of association issue to me. Now, I understand this is unpalatable to people because we have this weird idea in America that if you don't like something, it ought to be illegal. Well, I don't like a lot of things. I don't think they ought to be illegal. I'm not a same-sex marriage fan. I don't think it ought to be illegal. I'm libertarian on same-sex marriage. I think the government should get completely out of the business of marriage. Well, just as I am libertarian on the issue of same-sex marriage, I am libertarian on the issue of whether a business owner ought to be forced to cater to a particular population, even if that business owner is a jerk. Even if that business owner is a racist or a homophobe. Well, you want to be a racist or a homophobe? Guess what? You're going to go out of business because that's the way the market works. Capitalism is the single greatest force for tolerance in the history of humanity, not government control from above. Okay, so that's my perspective on this. But this case doesn't go that far. It also doesn't go as far as to even say that religious people have a right to act religiously in their business. Right? The case doesn't even say that if you are a baker, that you have the right to reject catering to a same-sex wedding. Instead, this case is decided 7-2 on the narrowest possible grounds, and that is the Colorado Civil Rights Commission is mean. Really, that's how the case was decided. The case is written by Anthony Kennedy, who's an execrable justice, just an awful, awful justice. He has never seen a copy of the Constitution, apparently, and so he just sort of wanders around in his bathrobe, and depending on whether he had his Metamucil-led bowel movement that morning, he decides how to rule. So here was his ruling today, delivering the opinion of the court. And this is a nonsensical ruling. It's a nonsensical ruling because it doesn't get to any key issue. It's good for the particular baker in this case, but it does not establish a broad principle that religious people can actually act religiously in their businesses, which you would assume would be protected by freedom of religion. I mean, when I say freedom of religion, generally what I mean is my ability to act religiously throughout my life, including in my business. That's not what the Supreme Court says. Instead, they simply evade the issue. Today in the Supreme Court, there was a big hearing over what they call the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. The Masterpiece Cake Shop case is basically a gay couple went into the cake shop of a religious Christian. The religious Christian said, sure, I'll give you a cake for your gay wedding, but I'm not going to put a cake topper with two dudes on top of it, nor am I going to put any messaging about congratulations to Bob and Steve Rue on their wedding, because that's not in line with my religious feelings. He also refuses to do the same thing for divorce parties. He refuses to do the same thing for anti-gay messages. If you go in there and you want to put on your cake, I hate gay people, he won't do that either. So this guy has, his own standards for where he will exercise his free speech rights and how he will use his business skills. And the gay couple decided that they were going to target this guy because this was taking place in Colorado. Okay, the idea that there are no bakeries in Colorado that will cater to gay people is fully crazy. Okay, of course, first of all, it's hard to find a cake shop across the United States that is not staffed by gay people. He found the only cake shop in the United States that is staffed by a religious Christian. And then they set this up. Now, this happens on a regular basis, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but it's never the narrative the media wants to tell. So in the case of Rosa Parks, which is a good case, right? Rosa Parks had planned in advance to not sit at the back of the bus so that there could be a civil rights movement behind her, right? It's something she coordinated with the NAACP in advance. That's a good thing. This was also coordinated in advance. Here is the gay couple, the vindictive, vitriolic, nasty gay couple who decided that it was absolutely necessary to force this Christian baker to violate his own religious beliefs so they could have a cake topper that made them feel better about themselves. I mean, as opposed to, being on national television holding hands because you're gay. I mean, clearly these people don't get enough attention and respect. What they really need is a random religious baker to bake them a cake. Go to hell. I mean, it's just gross. Here they are on MSNBC talking about what wonderful, kindly gentlemen they are, even as they destroy this guy's business. The guy lost 40% of his business. The state tried to force him to retrain family members in sensitivity, all because he just wanted to exercise his business as a religious person exercises his business. Just absurd. Anyway, here are these jackasses on national TV.
When a business decides to open its doors to the public, they need to serve the public equally. And, this whole time, that's what we've been asking for, is just to be treated equally in the public. And the reason why we're here today is because we've heard so many stories of discrimination nationwide over the past 5 years. And, we're standing up for ourselves in this, but we're also standing up for all these other people.
Okay, so first of all, at the time that they did this, Colorado did not recognize same-sex marriages. You understand what they're saying here? What they're saying here is that the state of Colorado, at the time that they did this, did not recognize same-sex marriage, but the baker is supposed to recognize their same-sex marriage by law. He's supposed to not only recognize it, but celebrate it by law at a time when the state of Colorado did not even recognize same-sex marriage. Do you understand how insipid and insane this is? Okay, first, I don't know what these guys do for a living. I don't know what they do for a living. But let's assume for a second that these douchebags, Charlie Craig and David Mullins, let's assume that they are speechwriters for a Democrat. Okay, let's assume that. I don't know if that's true or not. They probably aren't, but let's assume that they are for a second. Could I walk into their office today and say, listen, you guys, you're great speechwriters. This is your skill set. You are just amazing at this. I want you to write me a speech talking about how homosexual activity is a sin under Leviticus. Can you write that for me? Are they allowed to say no, or are they not allowed to say no? So according to their own light, they would not allowed to be say no, right? Because they would then be rejecting services to me, even though they're services they don't want to provide. It doesn't matter. I want them to provide the services. They'll give their services to anyone else, but they won't give their services to me. That's a violation of my rights as a consumer. See, the thing is that everyone who looks at this case knows this isn't about consumer rights. This is about violation of free speech. This is about violation of freedom of association. This is about them wanting to force someone to greenlight their lifestyle. That is what they are looking for. And maybe you think their lifestyle should be greenlit. That's your problem. But it's not the religious baker's problem. And guess what? They don't have to greenlight his lifestyle either. Okay, they don't have to. He's not looking. The baker in this case, Jack Phillips, he's not looking for them to greenlight his lifestyle. He just wants to be left alone. My sympathy and the moral impetus always lies with the person who wants to be left alone. Okay, in the United States, when it comes to government action, the moral impetus always lies with the person who wants to be left alone so long as they are not harming anyone else or removing their rights. These people do not have a right to the services of a religious baker. They don't have the right to anyone's services. You do not have the right to my services. I don't have the right to your services. If we don't respect the fact that we cannot demand crap from each other just because we want it, and what are we, 3? Okay, my son can demand things from me. He's 1.5 years old. My daughter can demand things from me. She's 3.5 years old. She's my kid, and she's a child. But adults don't get to demand things of one another. They don't have a right to. And these people do not have a right to the artistic skill of a religious baker. They do not.
No, it's completely against what would be your line of thinking as a libertarian. You would never want the government to force someone to do a specific task.
You're talking about the gay couple that wanted a wedding cake made?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your position on that, by the way?
Well, there's 2 issues. One issue is that they apparently went to places they thought would deny them so that they can make a story out of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't as simple as a loving couple went to some place, they wanted to get a cake made, and the people said no, and they're like, what the fuck? No, they wanted a story. And so they sought out places that they thought were going to deny them, and then they made a giant national event out of it. I don't think people should discriminate to the point where they're not going to make someone a cake. I mean, I think there's something fucked up about it.
Do you think the government should
government shouldn't step in? No.
Yeah.
I think you should let people know publicly that these are people that they discriminate against gay people, and so if you want your dollars to represent your opinions and your feelings on things, maybe you shouldn't buy a cake from these folks that don't want to make a cake for gay people. But the idea the government's going to step in, it seems crazy to me. But then as soon as I say that, I go, okay, well, what if they wouldn't make a cake for black people? Should the government step in then?
So, okay, so there's a couple of things. Right, so there's a couple of things there. So first off, it was about the specifics of the cake. I know a lot of people are going to get into the nitty-gritty of every legal part of this thing. But it was about a specific – it wasn't that he wasn't going to sell them a cake that was on the shelf. right?
He didn't want to make them.
He didn't want to make them a cake for this wedding. Now, that's asking him to do something that's artistic or that's not on
what was the variables? Like, did he want two men
apparently the conversation actually never got to that point because he denied them before that because he knew what it was going to be. So it never got to like, oh, you're going to draw us together or whatever. But he knew it was going to be a gay wedding.
So he just said, no, I'm not making a cake for a gay wedding.
Right. Now, look, but they could have bought a cake that was there. So
what if it was an interracial wedding? Would you have more of an issue with that?
So here's the deal. So look, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You have to serve people based on race and all of the minority statuses that there are. I'm not for relitigating that, but there is a libertarian argument that basically would say we don't need those laws anymore because the Civil Rights Act was in response to Jim Crow laws where states in the South had discriminatory laws. So we had the federal government come in and clean that up for everybody. So you have to serve everyone equally. You can't deny a black couple to come into your restaurant, or you have to serve them.
So why can you deny a gay person then?
No, but it was a specific thing. It was a specific. So look, put it this way: if there was a Jewish artist who took commissions for paintings, would you force that person to paint neo-Nazi signs? Of course not. You would never have the government come in and say that they are forced to paint something that's against their conscience. So I would say that your original position is the right one, which is it kind of sucks, right? It kind of sucks. Like, I wish in my heart of hearts, I'm gay again. Like, I wish that every baker would treat everyone equally and every person would treat everyone equally. He wasn't allowed to deny them something that was in the store already because you can't deny based on those protected categories. So he wouldn't have, by the Civil Rights Act, he wouldn't have been allowed to deny interracial couple a cake that existed there already. But could he have denied them one that he would have had to draw a black woman and a white woman if he was a real racist?
Yeah.
I think the answer is that he could have denied them that, and that would have been very shitty, and he would be a racist and a really awful person. But if the answer is that the government should then come in and tell this man what to do, I would not be for that.
I see what you're saying.
That's just the cleanest way to deal with this related to freedom. It's kind of shitty. Like, freedom is messy.
It's definitely shitty.
Yeah.
It's shitty,
but the government can't protect you from shitty.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously, that's why the KKK still exists.
Yeah, and what's the alternative? I mean, what's the alternative? We would all love the KKK to go away. We would all love there to be, not all of us, but most sane people don't want racism to exist. But should we not let people meet? Should we be bugging people? Should we force people to do something they don't want to do? I mean, I just fundamentally do not believe in that. I don't want people to be racist. I don't want people to be homophobic or transphobic. But the idea that the government can use its authority to make people do all of these things, I just think is absolutely crazy. So whether they decided to intentionally inflame this or not by finding people that weren't going to do it, if you're listening to this right now and you're getting married, you're getting gay married, or untraditionally married, as they call it, if you're doing that and you live in Alabama and there's only one baker there and he doesn't want to bake a gay cake, it sucks. It does suck. But what you might want to do is what I said about an hour ago, which is maybe leave that town. Like, maybe take your skills, whatever worth you bring to a community, and move to a bigger town where there probably is someone that do it, or order a cake online. I mean, the technological part that you just mentioned, that you can now tweet about stuff and go, don't go. Like, we have power as people. And the idea that we outsource all the decision making to the government is extremely dangerous. I mean, every horror in human history is a government doing things, basically. As long as governments have pretty much existed. It's not bands of nice individual people that disagree on some stuff murdering people.
Yeah. I mean, I understand your position, and I'm with you to a certain extent. I wish there was a clean answer. There's no clean answer.
No, but freedom's not clean. That's the point. Not.